Hello, Scott. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Me too. And I'm looking forward to discovering with you, learning from you what radical facilitation means, yeah, and how you can facilitate recovery after
Mhm.
disasters, trauma. And we'll come to all of that.
Mhm.
And I always start with the same question.
Mhm.
When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
So I'll start with when I was introduced to the concept of facilitation. It was in high school. I got in trouble and got in a fight, and I was in the vice principal's office. And instead of being expelled, I was sent to a leadership conference where I was introduced to student government. My punishment was to get into a leadership class, and that leadership program, and my advisor was very active in a youth organization called the California Association of Student Councils. And CASC was an organization that taught students how to use the interaction method, how to run meetings, how to plan projects. And so pretty much was exposed to the concept of facilitation through learning how to run meetings and facilitate meetings. So I would say, how to build an agenda, how to facilitate, a process to an outcome. And so that's been my trajectory over the last, geez, it'll be over 40 years now. So um, I do use the word, I sometimes use the word facilitator, and I also use the term difficultator as well, because I think sometimes I step into some spaces where I need to allow and create space for people to have difficult conversations to get it passed. But I think over the years, um, what I've discovered around facilitation is there's different types, like a meeting facilitation or facilitating a strategy. And then I started doing team building and ropes courses and facilitating adventure-based experiences. And so facilitating those journeys, learning journeys, very different than, facilitating a meeting. So I do consider myself as a facilitator, a curator, create space creator, where I want to do, but a conversation um, contributor. I don't really know what to label it, because in some parts of the world, like when I first started doing work in Russia, there was no term for facilitator. So
Hmm.
yeah, it was just kind of group leader basically. So it's whatever what people want to call me is I'm fine with. So
And helping them to get to insights and hopefully a better outcome being collaboration.
absolutely, yeah, yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a big part of, I think, for me, it's really been about building capacity in a way, like facilitating um, capacity within individuals, dyads, groups, teams, organizations, um, communities, and so that's a big part of, I think, the way I practice is to build capacity.
Yeah. And what a great start to the journey. I
Mhm.
mean, I think every student should be air quotes punished in this way. What a gift.
Absolutely. It was amazing because my vice principal saw that I had an innate talent. I think he probably saw that I was a complete BSer, um, someone who could engage with people. And I recall vividly, he said, basically I see more in you than you see in yourself, right? And he facilitated that to me. Unfortunately, he was killed in a car accident my sophomore year, my tenth
Mm.
year in high school. And to this day, I still think about what I would do. What would Mr. Beckett want me to do, right? So,
Beautiful.
because I still live with his legacy, right? And in that, I work to try to create space for other people to step into their greatness that they have. And I think part of facilitation is helping to do that as well. So,
Yeah, part of the capacity. And I love how you framed it that it's the capacity inside of individuals
mhm.
and for the groups.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I think they're both equally important,
yeah,
the
yeah,
self-reflection as well as a group reflection to then come to a
yeah.
shared alignment.
Well,
Yeah.
especially, I mean, the way I frame it now is, stress in any system is when demand exceeds capacity, right? So people will speak to how they're completely overwhelmed, or There's all this I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening in our worlds, in our communities that are requiring us to come together. And so the best way to meet the moment is to individually build our own individual capacity through resiliency and performance training and et cetera. And then there's the group capacity. The challenge oftentimes, especially where I live, is that a lot of people are really stressed out and they're needing to work collaboratively, right? And you've heard the saying, a rising boat raises all tides.
Mhm.
But if the boats are leaky in a meeting, right,
Mm.
it makes it hard to rise together. So really, understanding people's lived experiences, the trauma that they bring into the room, the experience that they bring into the room, and to use that in a way that's going to be transformative in service to a vision that they all want to get to, rather than being held trapped or hostage by those moments. So it's I think it's both art and science when we get into the facilitation space, at least for me. But the real intention is just to create the space, right,
Mm.
for people to explore those things that might be difficult or scary, or as an individual and or a team. So yeah.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack because I still want to come back to the difficultator,
Hmm.
and how to facilitate difficult conversations, but then also don't want to neglect this resilience piece that you just mentioned,
Hmm.
and the different spaces where individuals are in and how they join the session, and then how to work with all of this energy. Um, and maybe we park this
Sure.
down here,
Hmm.
and start with the difficultator,
Yeah.
because how would you define, you said that you help individuals or groups to have difficult conversations.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so what makes a conversation difficult? And what's the
Sure.
role of facilitation to bring maybe, I don't know whether it's ease or safety or comfort, or what do you bring, or capacity? Um,
Yeah.
to,
So I mean, there's a lot to that. So oftentimes, or is one of the things that often get brought into is groups that are in conflict, right? Or let's say I'm doing a team building and something bubbles up. And so oftentimes there are, we call it undiscussables or underground issues within a group. And so, um, you know, and I imagine anyone who's listening to this has probably been a part of a meeting where you're having a facilitated conversation or a planning meeting, and we're not talking about the things that we need to talk about, right? And so people would come up to me at a break, said, "We're not talking about the issues," and it's like, I don't know what those issues are. So you have to bring it up into the group, and so part of the process that I've learned over the years is really creating the conditions so that people can feel safe to open up. And so I think that the whole role of presence and safety and mindfulness and setting ground rules, all the things that we all know to do, but being really clear of getting agreement as to where they all want to go together and how they want to be as they're in that journey. And so, the facilitation, as we know, facil is to make easy. Um, but I think what it is, I think it's making it easy to talk about those difficult items by just acknowledging, like in performance science, I apply a lot of performance science work into this in terms of this, the idea of getting into a flow state, right? So when you're in a state of flow, you're more productive, you're more engaged. The most powerful state of flow is in deep conversation with other people because our brains are social. And so the stage of the flow, the first stage of flow is struggle. So what I really acknowledge is like, hey, it's okay to struggle. That if you're struggling, that's good. That's the fuel for the innovation. That's the fuel for the opportunity. That's, just acknowledging that the struggle, it's okay to struggle. And a lot of people, well, at least I can't say a lot of people, but it just seems like some out there who might be a little bit leaky struggle with struggling, like they think there's something wrong with them, or and it's like, no, that's part of the learning journey. Just like agitation is the first sign that you're learning. And so developing a sense of awareness and how people are showing up within themselves but with others, because we definitely can impact each other. Being able to curate a conversation that allows for people to begin to open up and test the waters, because oftentimes someone will finally just say something and get it off their chest that's been bothering them for 10 or 15 years. And people are just saying, why don't you bring it up when it happened? Because you've been
Mm.
holding on to that for a very long time. And so, part of it is in a sense, using these lived experiences in a way that can be of service to us rather than holding us hostage. And so that's part of it. And so a lot of people will sometimes just make up stories in their heads, and live in that stress, resent where they work, resent who they're working with. And I just want them to acknowledge the fact that when you do that, you're living in your own poison at that point. And how is that of service to you? So what can we do to create the conditions to have these conversations? So, but it takes time. I mean, and it's almost like, I was trying to come up with like an analogy of kind of this work. It's helping groups shift from a state of anxiety or anger or frustration into a state of possibility or excitement or enthusiasm. And so there's kind of like this alchemist type of dynamic where you're changing the chemistry within the group through the facilitation, through asking a question that puts them into a creative state, engages their prefrontal cortex, helps them think through like, what is that future state that I want to be? And so a lot of times when I'm going into really challenge groups, I'll just say, where do you all want to go together? And typically people say, well, does management come along, or do I have to? It's like, yeah, you don't have to do anything, but the question is, you have a choice in front of you, and you can either focus on what you want or spend a lot of time and energy focusing on and acting against what you don't want. So I just try to create a moving. I try to create a moving towards state for individuals, teams, collective, and then get them to talk about how to get there together.
Beautiful. And what I hear is also calming down the nervous system, so that, yes, if someone brings up a topic that happened years ago, it's clearly the sign that now they feel safe enough to do that. And then very quickly the energy or the atmosphere can shift in a way that then, oh, why are you bringing it up right now? So then it becomes blame, and then we're again in this kind of fighting defensive energy instead of in the curious accepting.
Yeah. And so within the so I think you asked a question about radical facilitation. I basically am within the U.S. Leading the charge and being handed over the publishing to the radical collaboration program that Jim Tam authored a book on. And we talk about the biggest derailer of group collaboration is when individuals get defensive. And a lot of the reasons why they're getting defensive comes from, again, for those out in your community that are probably familiar with the FIRO element B, Will Schutz's work, that people generally get defensive because they feel incompetent, insignificant, they don't feel liked or appreciated. And so much of the strategies that they use in defense is really to protect themselves from what they don't want to feel in those situations. So we're not protecting I'm not protecting myself against you. I'm protecting myself against a feeling that I don't want to experience in your presence. And so developing that level of awareness and really trying to keep the aperture open so that we can really be open to new possibilities, and not necessarily resolving whatever past conflict that has gotten in our way, but rather repurposing it so that conflict can actually transform us. Like, how am I different as a result of us being able to work through this dynamic, right? So it's, instead of it being about you are this to me, really help them understand that it's a dynamic between you and I that can be resolved, and we can be different and better as a result of resolving it. And that takes practice, that takes skill, and it takes someone that can hold space for people without judgment, right? It's not about judgment. It's about just acknowledging the fact that must have been pretty crappy back then, or when that happened, right? So.
Thank you for bringing that up. And I'm thinking to what you said earlier about the trauma that everyone brings into the space. And it reminds me that very often we're not even reacting defensive or aggressively against a person or this situation, but as you said, it's the feeling that we don't want to show in front of others. And it's maybe even a feeling that has been triggered by a totally different experience, but our brain is connecting it and thinks, oh, we are back here. So it is kind of a stress response or almost post-traumatic that gets re-triggered.
Yeah. Well, and I think, again, some studies suggest that that where our brain processes social pain is the same neural substrates that process physical pain, and I think much of what we do in the facilitative, collaborative team space is social. And so I think it's not just about the techniques, it's an understanding that we are social creatures. And again, we're trying to build that social capacity to talk through these difficult challenges. And it's like an acknowledgement, yeah, that's difficult. And now we have a choice.
Mm.
Do we want to work through it? And then to create those conditions, without being, too rule-based, but more, again, purpose-driven. How is that going to help? How is that going to serve us? And more importantly, just, what can we learn from those experiences so they don't happen again? But, if you told me I was an idiot in a meeting many years ago, I might be really cautious of saying anything in front of you, right? So, we only put our hand on a hot stove once, so why would I ever put myself in a line of fire? And so again, I think the psychological safety work that we talk about often, or has been talked about, is really critical, because your brain can't focus on anything until it feels safe.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm glad that you're bringing that up, because an earlier thought that crossed my mind was when you spoke about facilitation making it easy, and then also referring to the safety. I have the impression that there's a lot of misconception of these words, thinking, oh, facilitation, it has to be easy, although bringing in some difficulty to really speak about what's necessary
Yeah.
is important. And at the same time, safe space is often misconceived as cozy, nice, although it's actually the space where these difficult conversations
Yeah.
or the
Yeah.
conflict can happen in a very constrained, safe environment.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, many years ago, before I started working with Jim Tam in the radical collaboration space, Jim talks about, being in the red zone or the green zone, and
Mhm.
now there's this pink zone, right? So the red zone is low trust, high, high blame culture. Green zone is more trusting, low blame, and then there's the pink zone. And many years ago, before I was introduced to Jim's work, I had a different framework called the battleground, common ground, and underground. So the battleground would be the red zone, right, where there's a lot of hostility, open hostility, which you
Mhm.
don't see as much anymore in organizations. Um, but you do see a lot of the underground or pink zone, and the green zone or the common ground doesn't mean that it's void of conflict, but the group and the individuals know how to work through that conflict, right? So, we talk about just growing the green, right? So, and grow the common ground, and it's like it's a process, and so building in the capacity for individuals and groups to learn how to be better together in pursuit of whatever it is that they're wanting to collectively co-create is really the art of collaboration. I mean, the extension to me of collaboration is consciously co-creating with you and with others. And again, just crafting a conversation that allows for those things to occur.
Yeah. And I wonder where it comes from. You mentioned that the visible hostility has reduced, and I assume it's because there's also less tolerance for toxic behavior.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then somehow I'm thinking of anti-drug laws that are implemented, and then you don't see them in the on the surface, but below the surface, it still
Oh
exists,
yeah,
it
oh
grows,
yeah,
and sometimes becomes even worse.
yeah, yeah.
Is there something like that you also observe in organization, that, okay, we don't have the active, visible hostility and toxicity anymore, but now it's maybe more under the surface, passive
Yeah.
aggressive? And
Oh
how
yeah.
do you deal then with that? Because it's more difficult to actually point out, grasp, and
Yeah.
confront.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way you confront, so I've done a lot of different work with different programs over the years, and like when you think about the word confront, right, it's to be in front of the issue with you rather than
Mhm.
confront the person. Let's confront the dynamic together. So, a lot of times, depending on the context of the meeting that I'm being asked to do, but you see someone get defensive, right? I witnessed that, and I just stay curious to understand, because some people will close down, right? Some people will fight. Some people will freeze. Some people will leave. Um, and so what I generally do is I will upfront some of the work if it's really some heavy lifting work with just some of the cognitive literacy. Like, here's how we're wired, right? So giving people a sense of just saying, look, if you're struggling, it's normal. It's not you. It's your nervous system. It's your brain. And here are some strategies. So I developed that level of awareness, because when working with leaders and communities, I often say there are two types of leaders. They're, self-aware and self-absorbed. And which one are you? And which one do you want to be? And everyone, well, I want to be self-aware. It's like, great, I got that going for me right now. And so the real question would be, how do we keep the aperture open? But when you get triggered, it goes back to understanding the social brain. Like for me, and I often am very transparent. I don't want to take away from their experience, but I want to use myself as a case study. Like I used to be, and like I used to say, I was a fighter growing up, and the problem with fighting was feedback, and getting punched in the face. And so I had to learn how to use my words, and I had to learn how to have conversations. I had to learn that a feeling isn't a bad thing, and it's just information that I can use, and I want to make sense of it, and I want to make sense of it with you. And so I'm going to share with you what comes up for me when that occurs. I'm not saying you're doing it to me, but this is what I feel in your presence. And so helping people make sense of their own experience, because if they're not self-aware, they become, I think, very confused and maybe mystified by some of the things that go on in their lives. And so they turn into this blame. So I really acknowledge people, like if you have someone in your life that when you think of them, and again, it really depends on the abuse. I mean, there are people that have been abused and are really severe victims. And so I'm not speaking to that dynamic. I am speaking to the dynamic where I had a little experience where you humiliated me in a meeting 20 years ago, and I just can't get past it. And so getting people to unpack from some of those things, and the lost opportunities. And I've seen it in many groups where someone has said, like, a few years ago, this was said to me. It's like, why didn't you bring it up when I said it? I didn't know how, right? So
Mm.
it's a skill issue. And oftentimes my ability to do something is not so much a will. Like my attitude towards doing something is going to be driven by more of what I'm capable of in those moments rather than my attitude or my will in those moments. And so will is often impacted by my ability.
Beautiful. Thank you for unpacking that.
Yeah, which is funny because I think that's what we're doing, right? I love the metaphor of unpacking. I think I forget the Richard Leitner, forget his I think it's name, but he wrote a book, I think, Unpack Your Bags, which was always a really good metaphor, right? Because if you think about how many experiences and in the community and leadership space, we have all this stuff, right? Going on in our lives, we have all these lived experiences, right? Good, bad, and different, but we make meaning out of those things, and so the metaphor that I kind of gleaned from his work was like, how often do you like you're going on vacation soon, right? And I think you're even talking about what you don't want to bring, which I thought was beautiful, right? But how many people pack their bags with stuff that they never unpacked during their journey, right? And
Mm.
so, part of the work of helping people move through their experiences is to use those experiences in service to their work and to their lives and to their relationships, rather than, again, being held hostage by the weight. They can either let go of it, but it's always going to be there, right? There's always a memory. Because again, going back to the social pain, physical pain, I mean, you have stronger memories about what someone said to you than you do falling off your bicycle, right? And so you just never know. I was in a meeting one time, and I said, in terms of dealing with conflict, you can, fight, flight, or play dead, or you can lean in, right? And this woman in the class had just read Sheryl Sandberg's book called Lean In, and she didn't like her. She didn't like the book, and so she just shut me down. But we had a good enough relationship where she came up to me. She goes, when you said that, I just shut you down, and I have to apologize. Like, well, thank you for sharing. But you just never know what word will land on someone or what question. And that's why I think facilitation to me is really just the art and science of asking questions based upon what people are what they're saying. And in a sense, just kind of holding up the mirror where there's a lesson and a discovery that can be discovered, and then that can be utilized for themselves individually or with other people or within the team. And that's when the real magic happens, is when they start developing their own insights. Like they have that like, oh my gosh, now if I can let go of that. Like I asked a question a couple of days ago, if you could let go of all the titles or all the labels that you put on yourself or on this team, how would you be different? And it was almost like this huge opening of possibilities for the group. It's like, gosh, because we say this to ourselves our way, and we say this about ourselves, or when someone says I am this to explain away something, I just get curious and say, well, it sounds like you can be that, but what else can you be? So we just have some really yeah. So I think human beings we sometimes fall into bad habits in our thinking, and so I think a good good facilitator helps people to think, creates a safe place for people to think, and then use that thinking and build on each other thinking in a conversation. So
Yeah. And allow for the transparency of the hidden items in the baggage.
yeah. I mean,
I
I'll read War and Peace. Like, no, you're not. It's like 8 pounds of weight you're going to carry around on your trip. You don't need that. So, yeah, it's crazy. That's why I love what you posted. Like, I'm thinking about what I'm not taking with me, and I'm like, how brilliant. Like, what do we not want to take into the room into this
mm.
next conversation? And can we name it in a way that's going to allow us to actually have more space to create together? So
And it's actually a question that I enjoy asking in a check-in. What do you bring into this meeting and what do you leave outside?
mhm.
Just to give everyone also the opportunity to say, I'm leaving outside this email that stressed me or a personal
Oh, yeah,
issue.
yeah,
And just by voicing that,
yeah,
there's this general
yeah,
relaxation
yeah,
because it brings us together as humans. We all have stuff that we don't want to deal with right now.
yeah, yeah.
And it still uses our CPU,
Well,
our
well, and
human
the
CPU.
superpower of that, yeah, when you do that, you're basically mitigating the amygdala. I mean, you're tempering the amygdala because they're naming it. Like, so a big
Mm.
part of that in that check-in is not only what are you coming in with, but what are you anxious about after you leave? And a lot of people are like, is this anything going to happen? It's like, well, let's make sure it does. So again, what that by alleviating those fears, they can actually focus. So that's a brilliant strategy. That's one that I lean on quite a bit. Very similar. Yeah.
And this can be a nice bridge to bring back the package that I parked here. The
Okay.
topic of when you mentioned that participants come, they're in different states, they have different trauma, they
Mhm.
have different experience before. And how to level that. And maybe I'm sure you have a general reflection on that.
Well, I think it's so tied to the context. Like, what am I being brought in to help with, right? And so I think a big part of the awareness of any good facilitator is, who am I as a facilitator coming into this room? What am I being asked to do? Right? What is
Mm.
and so the pre-work, I think, is really critical. And I'm always really more refined in terms of, like, what is the outcome that you want to see? I'm not so much concerned of who's in the room, but rather, what do y'all want to do together? And I often do one-on-one conversations with people in advance, so I'm not this mysterious, person coming in the room. And so I usually like to set the table where I have relationships with people in advance and find something that, what lights them up, what are some of their, anxiety points. So I do a lot of upfront, depending upon the type of work I'm being asked to do. And so the more challenging, the more prep. And I think the more preparation allows me to improvise in those moments, because what people say to me in a Zoom call, um, if they're not being open or transparent, or maybe they don't even show up to the call because they don't even want to be a part of the process, is just staying open and curious in those moments. Um, but when people are triggered, again, it says a couple things. If someone can be triggered and share that angst in front of the group, it already shows that the group has demonstrated a sense of safety in a way.
Mm.
Like, I
Mhm.
mean, so I
Totally.
want to acknowledge the fact that, can we just acknowledge that this was brought up
Yeah.
in everyone's presence? So as a collective team, what can we do with it? And there's a fine line, because there's some people that bring up the same thing over and over and over again. And people are like, oh, all right already, So it's getting them to do something with the data, because that's all it is. It's data, in my view, but there's an emotion tied to the data that,
Yeah.
because again, emotion drives everything we're doing. And so being cognizant of the emotion, because if they're overly strung out or jacked up, they're not going to be open or receptive to anything. It's finding, to your point, like you do, like getting people grounded and settled, so something blows up, having the wherewithal to, like, maybe we need to take a quick break, check in, or, what do you want to do with that? I love the question that David Emerald talks about with his work on the empowerment dynamic of, the victim, the persecutor, and the rescuer roles, right? If you're familiar
Mm.
with his work. And so when people are in that drama space, they're just saying, well, what do we want right now, right? Getting their prefrontal cortex activated again, what do we want is maybe we need a break. Great. What are we going to prepare to talk about when we come back? Because again, people need to down regulate a bit, maybe do some breath practice, maybe go to your happy place. Because some groups I've been in, and especially now, I think this is where the pink zone comes in and the underground comes in, is that we're dealing with a lot of big challenges in our communities and our organizations. We're in places that we've never been before. And so there's a cognitive dissonance and people trying to figure out, like, what can I do? What sort of control do I have? Because what we're being asked to do is we've never been here before. We've never experienced this before. And so getting folks to just kind of share, here's what scares the crap out of me.
Yeah.
Because I think there is kind of this funky energy out there that I'm experiencing, in our community with all the fires we've been having, with natural disasters. And there is a sense of existential crisis for a lot of people. They just don't know how to name this kind of deeper sense of angst. And that's where, again, we have to rise up. We have to confront it. We're not going to solve for it, but how are we going to be different? How do we need to be different so that we can adapt and be resilient in kind of this new world? So
That's I find this fascinating. I'm very curious to hear from your experience how to facilitate resilience or recovery in a situation where nobody has control over. A natural disaster happens to us. We can only be reactive. And I think in such situation, of course, the fight, flight, freeze mode kicks in because we are scared. How do you help them to remain functioning as a collective, to support each other, and not to fall into the traps triggered by extreme stress and survival?
Well, it's a great question, and it's kind of been the work I've been doing over the last couple of years. As I've shared with you, I live in Chico, California, near the town of Paradise that was destroyed in 2018. Most recently, the Park Fire that's currently going on. It's destroyed over 400,000 acres in the Chico area. So in 2018, when the Camp Fire hit, we, as a community, created what was called the Camp Fire Collaborative, mostly addressing fire recovery and how to treat victims. But in that journey, right, I immersed myself in helping manage our state and the individual side of it, the group side of it. But we also in Butte County have started, we have a resiliency collaborative, a food systems collaborative, a mental health collaborative. We have all these community groups coming together, and so we're also working for the state doing a lot of disaster preparedness work. And so the project that I think about when I think about resiliency, because I think a lot of times when people view resiliency, whether it be individual resiliency as a human or team resiliency, organizational resiliency, or community resiliency, there's this knee-jerk reaction, we got to take things away. But the reality is, if you're going to build resiliency, you have to actually add stress to the system, right? Not overwhelming where people shut down, but rather we're going to continue. So the way I frame resilience in my mind, I came up with this easy way of thinking about resiliency as the 3 R's of resiliency. I mean, it's relevant, I think, to all of us, individually, teams, collective organizations. So the first R is readiness. Like, how do I ready myself for this scenario? And which means I have to think about things that I've never imagined before. And then I need to practice what I would do in those situations, because your brain's a prediction machine. It's placing bets. This is Amy Feldman Barrett's work, and I love her work because she really speaks to this idea of how we're making bets. Emotions are merely guesses, right? So there's a lot more at play here. So we're working with groups where we're saying, what are the potential worst case scenarios? I was working with a large organization that does large scale projects, and we're like, what are all the worst case scenarios that could occur, and if they would occur, what would be, how do we need to show up? And I became a search and rescue volunteer after the Camp Fire, and so we do a lot of practice in real scenarios of over the edge, and really, because we have to practice, right? So big part is we always say whatever you do, you get better at, and I think we got to be better at thinking We have to be better at talking through stuff. We have to be better at struggle, right? So, when you mentioned when I mentioned the first phase of flow is struggle, first sign of learning is agitation. So we have to be okay with, we have a lot of things in front of us. So how do we ready ourselves? Because the best way to respond and recover is ready. Just be ready. And there's so many things that are out there. So that just, getting people to talk about that stuff, and some people say, well, that'll never happen. And the next thing we have a fire that has destroyed homes of over 30,000 people overnight. It happened up in Canada just recently. It happened, we got these floods in the US now. So I think we have to get out in front of this and then set up systems and partnerships or I call smartnerships in a way that allow us to kind of add each other's strength to co-create. So the first R is readiness. And so there's that curation of conversation. The second is response. Okay, so it does occur. And in large case accidents, you have the emergency management services have incident command. So it's more of a coordinated effort, right? And one of the things that really hits me is we talk a lot about like breaking silos down. And I'm not so sure that's essential when we talk about, disasters, because I want the best first responder that there is, and I want them to live in that silo and practice in that silo. But what I really encourage in our community is to say, how do you then also then collaborate so you can be better at that service, right? At that silo. What are the support systems that you need to be effective in that silo? Because if large scale fires, they have this huge incident command center and everyone's got their part to play. It's very coordinated, but it's the post, right? So is where the collaboration kicks back in because the community has to recover. So if we're not doing that on the front end, then we're going to be making a lot of, which we experience in the campfire, that we're going to be making a lot of stuff up on the back end, which is costly, it's ineffective, turf issues start to come into play. And so, it's about, readiness, response, and then recovery. So we need to be able to recover and recover well. So in these situations, so we did a last year for the state of California Listos project, we designed a bunch of simulations, human-centered design simulations where, you're a individual in a wheelchair on the second floor and a flood hits, you have an earthquake and then a flood, what is your strategy, right? So we have to put people in these scenarios so they can think through them. And there's a wonderful book that Jane McGonigal has called Imaginable, and it's really, it's all about scenario kind of planning kind of stuff. So facilitating those conversations are also really fascinating. Tabletop discussions, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I can see how the readiness and the preparation is so crucial, because when we're under stress, we cannot think of creative solutions.
Right.
And then I wonder where dynamics such as superstition come into play. Like, oh, don't talk about it because then it happens.
Yeah, well,
So
yeah,
all
yeah.
these kind of maybe irrational human dynamics that then feed into these group dynamics and the process and the, oh, I don't want to think about it because it's dangerous. That's struggling with struggling.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's the and I think it's okay. I mean, we have to allow people to be who they are, where they are, right? Because again, in a way, um, there has to be some level of change in the way we approach the way we're doing things to get to where we need to go. And there's a book, Immunity to Change, for example, right? There's just all these things that are built in, and we say it's hardwired, and it can be if we don't practice new ways of thinking, new ways of being. And so a big part of the work has been, for me lately, is focusing on, instead of having a to-do list, I have a to-be list. Like, how do I need to be as I step into this difficult conversation? How do I need to be as I step into this scenario? And so it's more about the state that I hold rather than being stressed or freaked out. It's like because my state, the state that I hold, will impact your state. And if I can be calm and focused and curious.
Co-regulation. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a big part of it, and I think that's what we're seeing in Butte County. We'll have these collaboratives, and people are coming in, and they're jacked up, they're they're highly aroused, and so being able to help them down regulate so they can focus. So doing a check-in or a breath practice, grounding themselves
Yeah.
so that they can actually move into the conversation and feel like they can actually better cope and co-create rather than like, hey, me, which is a stress response, right? It's
Mhm.
self-based, self-centered, self-absorbed, and we have to keep, I think, at least the way I'm facilitating now is I really work to keep the aperture open, like keep the landscape so that people can see the broader horizon of the impact of their choices, and just be really clear on, hey, where are we going together? What are we, trying to co-create together, and really create that outcome, again, the outcome orientation. Because if we're so focused on the problem, again, some of the work that David Emerald has done, he's got a book called The Three Vital Questions, and I love it because, I can easily, if I'm focusing on the problem, it creates internal agitation, right? And so I'm more reactive. And so we're not necessarily responding to the problem, we're responding to our own anxiety. And so it's getting
Mhm.
people to kind of step out and say, well, what do you want instead? Like, well, I want this, but that'll never happen. Well, not yet. Well, what would it need to take to make that happen? And get them to step into a future that they want, and then start to understand the rules and the biases and all the things that are kind of getting in the way. Because it's, if that does occur, what would we do instead? Well, we can do this. Okay, what else could we do? And just getting people to start to see that they have more agency, um, more control, and be a part of the solution rather than, um, you know,
The victim
just
to
setting
the
up to the
problem.
side. Yeah, yeah. Because again, when you talk about the roles, a persecutor could be a person, a situation, or a condition, right? Um, and so, what are those conditions that I'm feeling a victim to? And it's not of service to them or anyone. Now, again, there are real victims. I'm not going to deny that at all.
Yeah.
But to live in that is not healthy for any of us. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I hear is to learn how to regulate the stress response, because the moment we're in high stress, we react and then we forget about everything. And I'm curious about two things. One is how to train resilience and feeling more comfortable in embracing stress in a healthy way, without overstressing the system. Because
Mhm.
if I remember correctly, stress is good because it's adrenaline, makes us think straight, we're focused. Um, but if we're constantly under stress,
Yeah,
we burn down,
yeah,
we burn
yeah,
out.
yeah. Well, I think that's where the recovery comes in. So
Mm.
just as systems need to be
Yeah.
resilient, ready
Yeah.
to respond. Because, and the same thing with, like, in flow, like the stages of flow is, struggle, right? And then the second is release. Like, I have to just acknowledge, like, you've been in it, you've done this in your studies. You're probably really struggling with a concept, for example, like,
Mhm.
oh, I got to take a break. And so, but you acknowledge that you're struggling. We just have to accept that we're struggling. It's like, great, acknowledge it, give yourself the break, and then you come back to whatever it is you're working on, and you find yourself getting into that flow state, right? And then the fourth stage, because getting into flow or working really well together, it's exhausting, and so you need to recover. And so so basically, a lot of the time when I'm working with groups is I really kind of work within the bookends of flow. It's like, let's give people the skills to struggle more effectively. So if I'm conflicted, how do I struggle through that? How do I work through the struggle, acknowledge it, and then how do I recover from that? So a big part of the I think helping, or at least for me, what's been really helpful is just understanding, the energy that I bring to the room, like what's required of me, um, and again, creating a space that allows for other people to be authentic, and release some of whatever is getting in the way, so that we can actually move forward. So, um, yeah, it's like I said, it's there. When I'm facilitating a meeting, it can turn into a learning conversation, right? If I'm facilitating a learning conversation, it can turn into a meeting. So I just never know. A lot of times, even though they have outcomes, sometimes things surface, and so knowing that the group wants to go a different direction, or um, do something differently. It's always fun to be open to, expecting things to happen, but being open to other things, so that it's not about me. It's, again, creating the space. I think I shared with you this idea of, a friend of mine shared with me this idea of Socrates used a maieutic method of facilitation or teaching, which is, and maieutic means ever pertaining to being a midwife, right? So it's about
Mhm.
creating the space for life to be born, but ultimately it's the individual, or it's the group's baby, it's their thing, and so just drawing that out of them. And I think, again, I think I shared with you in our previous conversation that, uh, you know education is to draw out, induce to draw out,
Mm.
right? It's not about putting in. And that's what I love about, like, in, I think, Plato's dialogues, it's Socrates talking to the slave owner, and the slave owner doesn't think the slave knows anything, but just through questioning, the slave is able to articulate an answer to a problem. And I think that's what we have to tap into as facilitators.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially in the resiliency space. Like, we have the capacity. I mean, our ability to be innovative. And so, just as humanity shows up after disaster, I think my mission is to tap into that humanity before and that innovation before. It's a heavy lift, right? It's a really
Yeah.
heavy lift.
Yeah, because a disaster will happen anyway.
Mm-hmm.
At some level. And I wonder, and you mentioned before that the emotional pain is undistinguishable from the physical pain. So I would imagine that a physical disaster is also processed in a similar way as an emotional mental disaster. And I wondered what you have learned from your work with the community and the fire
Mm-hmm.
recovery for organizations who deal with their struggles and stress and maybe
Yeah.
redundancies or mergers, acquisitions, whatever it is.
Well, soon after, I mean, our county invested in a program called the Community Resiliency Model, and it's based a lot on neuroscience and trauma recovery, trauma informed recovery. Um, and my biggest takeaway from that journey is just getting people to understand, like, our nervous system is really driving everything that we do. And so it's, again, that cognitive literacy, that neuro literacy, that the understanding how we're built, because the human operating system is pretty phenomenal, right? Um, and so creating that level of awareness that, if you're feeling stress in your body, um, move your body. You can, or let's say, like, I mean, they're really simple strategies um, that are available. And I practice it in my own work. I mean, there are times where I might be low energy and I have to go in and facilitate a difficult conversation. So I got to get my state into that state. So I got to get myself ready. I have to, in that moment where someone is being triggered and they're starting to attack me or they're attacking other people in the room, um, being able to do something with that. But a big part of that is like doing a breath practice. The 2 sips and a sigh that Huberman talks about are called physiological sigh, or going to your happy place, which is called resourcing in the work that we do. But shifting and staying is this idea: if you feel stress in let's say your shoulders, um, can you think of a part of your body that currently you don't even pay attention to, like your right big toe, for example, right? Wiggle that right big toe, put your attention to a part of your body that's not feeling stress, and see what happens. So again, part of it is giving people that sense of agency and control over that moment in time, because there's so many things in a disaster we can't control what happens. It's how do we again prepare for what we do during and after.
Mhm.
And that preparation, but that's what we need to explore, the possibilities of what could occur. um, and not be afraid. Just let's be exploratory. Like I said, it's giving people the opportunity to, and with AI and all these other things that are out there, we have to really prepare for some things that, and teach people how to think. I mean, if anything, again, a big goal for me is helping people think um, together, both individually and collectively, to do something with that thought and put it into action in service to their mission, right? Or whatever that might look like for them, personal, team, goal, community. So.
Yeah, and disentangle the thought from the experience, from the reality, from
Yeah,
perception, because
yeah.
that's where it gets complex, right?
Yeah.
Because
People,
every
people, but people will give you cues, right? Right. Have you ever heard someone ask a question when there's a comment in it?
Mhm.
Right. Like when my wife says, "Are you going to wear that?" It's like she's like, "Just tell me you don't
This is
like it."
not a question.
Exactly. And
It's an
I think,
advice.
yeah, those are the kind of the things that you just. I think for me, I want to create a little levity and use a little bit of humor, use some of my own storytelling, because I think storytelling is also a part of the facilitative journey experience. Um, but it has to be um, aligned with, it's kind of metaphors, like playing with metaphors, playing with stories, um, and let people relate. Yeah, there's so much packed in me. I mean, I have so many different facilitation or experiences where I'm in groups and I have the luxury and the opportunity and the gift and the honor to kind of help, or I don't even say help, but just to create space for people to kind of learn and discover and then work together a plan that I feel like I'm kind of in the moment type of facilitation, but it's the in the moment. The only reason I'm in the moment is because I have a lot of experiences I can draw from,
Yeah.
and yet being clear on what the purpose for them is in that moment in time, right? And there's so many methodologies, and sometimes I lean on them, and sometimes I don't because they're not relevant in that situation. So
Yeah.
there's no one size fit all for any group, and I think that's the trap, right? Because I
And
think
the
a lot of
beauty
yeah,
that makes
exactly.
it an art and an art, right?
Yeah. I mean, think of how many infinite possibilities exist in a group of 12 people in terms of learning, right?
Yeah.
And every experience can be a learning opportunity if we want to curate it that way, right? So
Yeah, and where we put our attention. You mentioned the anecdote of the participant who related to the book Lean In and therefore
yeah,
dismissing you. It's like
yeah,
there's a learning opportunity. What is it that triggers you, and what are you making out of that? It's right
yeah,
there, and then
yeah,
it's a decision: are we going down that path? Are
yeah,
we just boxing it and keeping it there and going down another path?
yeah. Well,
Um,
that's where like facilitating learning is so interesting because there's a couple different methods that I've used. You've probably heard of the learning cycle, right?
mhm.
So the describe,
The
interpret,
code.
generalize, and
Mhm.
yeah. There's describe, interpret, generalize, and apply. I use discover, connect, and create. There's TOPS, which is ORID, objective, reflective, interpretive, decisional. But it's our brain's processing where we're sense making. Um, so what happened? Why that happened? What'd you feel? Why'd you feel that way? Where else does it happen? What can you learn? How can you apply? And I think that was probably one of the reasons why I do this work because that cask organization I mentioned earlier, we would do meeting facilitation, but then we would explore, group competition, doing structured experiences, collaboration, consensus building exercises. And after every experiences, we would debrief it.
Mm.
What happened? What did you feel? Where else do you feel that way? What can you learn?
Yeah.
And typically when people say, what can you learn? They say, well, can I do this? And they answer with a question. It's like, well, what would happen if you did that? And then all of a sudden they step into this idea themselves that wasn't there before. And all of a sudden they're like, holy crap, I could be something that I thought I wasn't. And that's just beautiful, right? Where they
Mm.
just step into their own potential, their own vision of who they really want to be. And I think
Mm.
that's the magic that again, it's not me creating it. I'm just asking questions.
And for me, that's a beautiful example where the difficultating comes in.
Mhm.
So they're almost grasping for permission or asking a question back and then not giving them an answer, not giving them the permission, but passing the ball back to, okay, do
Yeah,
you want that?
exactly.
Making it difficult for them so that it later on becomes easy.
Yeah, yeah. And that's where I think I learned in doing like ropes courses and team building events. Like we would do extreme events, right? And really working with the whole human, right? That's in front of you because it's physiological, it's biological, it's all these things that are going on. And being perceptive enough to know. And again, I still step in my own shit sometimes. I still say the wrong question. I still trigger somebody, and it wasn't intentional, right? It's never my intent. It's always about impact. And so I just stay curious, like, hey, what's coming up for you as that question was posed, or when someone said that, what's coming up for you? What are you making up right now? And staying curious with that space, um, rather than again getting defensive. And I think that's
Mm.
that's what I've learned the most is just being open, um, to hearing and not only hearing but understanding, um, what is being said, what is being felt, because that's again it's the feeling, of confidence or the feeling of safety or the feeling that people are leaving with that, oh, we can get this done together now. And I think that is always a gift when people can actually get results with the work that, I've been able to help them do together. And that's really the magic of good facilitation in my view.
Yeah. Earlier, I heard you stumble over the word help.
Yeah.
What was that?
Well, I want to be really cautious, and this is my own practice because I think ego, I want to make sure that what happens when I leave, right? So a lot of times, I'm working with a client right now. It's like, how come we can only talk honestly when you're in the room, right?
Mm.
And so there's kind of this codependency right now, and I'm really struggling with um, do do I want to continue to work with them, right? Because I'm like this crutch, I'm like a safety thing, and so building their capacity to have the same types of conversations, um, and so that's the formula I'm trying to work on. You know, they're having some really fruitful conversations, and I think we're making some strides, but I don't want to feel like um, that if I'm helping, then they attach the reward of the breakthrough with me rather than their own work. Uh,
Mm.
so I want to be cognizant. I mean, it doesn't mean that I'm not helpful, or I'm not responsible, or at least I'm my responsibility is to creating the space, right? Their responsibility is to fill it and to
I
do
love that.
something with doing something with the space that has been given to them, or that I'm willing to give that I'm willing to give to them. I think I shared with you again. Um, Parker Palmer, who wrote a book called The Courage to Teach, and he wrote it years ago. But the thing that really resonated with me about his book is he talks about like the community of learning, right? Where instead of the traditional, he has a middle a, a model of a hierarchy where you have the subject matter on the top, and then you have the teacher, the trainer, and then you have the minions, right? And so it's like pelican, like feeding the students or the participants the information. It's like I'm feeding them the fish that I've eaten, but it's through my own baffle, like my interpretation, my biases are
Mm.
now filtering it. And now I'm putting my filter of that subject into you, that you're going to be having your own lived experience and processing it, versus putting the subject or the outcome in the middle. Like, just like, let's sit around this thing and let's create a relationship with it and talk about our relationship with whatever I'm being challenged with. And then let's have a conversation to see if the subject is relevant anymore, if we can learn from it, if we can have it be of service to us. But instead of the subject being top down, it's really being with the group and just creating the space, and eventually teaching, or giving them the opportunity to practice the methodologies of inquiry, um, curiosity,
Ownership.
you know, yeah, just that dynamic. And so,
Mm.
and words matter. I mean, I think that's the piece, is that a word is an icon to meaning for many people. And so, like, the word lean in, or the words lean in, could be a trigger for some people, just like, you know, performance could be a trigger for
Yeah.
people. So really being thoughtful,
Yeah.
without being paralyzed, right? It's like, I'm going to say some things, and especially in the whole D&I space, like, I still will say you guys, right? And
Mm.
I'm working on it, and it's not, and I even say like, hey, I'm working on this, in the very beginning. And so if I say something that is offensive, without the intent. Like, if you get offended, I'll let you know, I will sometimes draw back. I'm an old guy. I'm an old white guy. And so I might say something that might trigger you in a certain way. Just give me some feedback, because it's not my intent. But if my impact on you is negative, please let me know, whether it be at break or call me out in the group, because there's nothing you're going to say that's going to hurt my feelings, because I want to be better in your presence, right? So that's,
Mm.
we create some of those social contracts well. But again, everything is tied to the context that I'm stepping into at that moment.
I love that. To create the agency right away to call anything out that could distract them then from the
Yeah.
content.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what I hear in your wording is the um, trying to remove the passivity from the participants. So you're not helping, you're not teaching, you're supporting, creating space,
Mhm.
creating opportunities for them for discovery.
Yeah, well, in the old ropes course days, it was challenge by choice, right?
Mm.
There are so many choices in front of us right now. And what's the next choice? What's the next step we need to take? Um, and how is it going to be in service to what we want to collectively do together? So that I always want to be mindful, and that it's not about me. Just got to take myself out of the picture, but yet I have tremendous influence, right? So there's this double edge of responsibility of, and this is where, again, not having people become dependent on my capacity, but rather build their capacity to have that same level of audacity to ask that question when you're confused, right? Or
Hmm.
wanting to seek clarity. And that needs to be practiced. So yeah, so that's the part. And again, especially now because there's so much uncertainty for a lot of people, um, we have to explore those uncertain moments for all of us, So and that's where that psych safety again kicks back in for me.
Yeah. Would that be your facilitation challenge? Or what is your facilitation challenge?
I think it is. It's being really clear that in that book, Parker Palmer, he says, "Who's the you that's in the room?" Right?
Mm.
Who are you bringing to the room? And that could be for the facilitator, it could be for anybody. But I guess what I want to be is really clear of what I'm not, right? And really clear that I'm there to just be a guide, be a guide to this outcome. And if I've done the pre-work and I've worked with people and I've talked to people, it's like, and my role is to help you get to where you want to go together. I've some groups I will do agreements with, some groups I don't. Um, uh, the ones that I do are the ones that probably need some frames to work through together and practice together. But it's creating the structure that allows the behaviors to be effective so they get the result they want. And so, yeah, so I guess the big challenge is just having clarity and being clear and making sure I don't cross that line. And if I do, ask myself, why am I crossing this line? So,
The self-awareness piece.
which isn't always easy, especially when you're dealing with, the crisis, when you're dealing with people who are struggling, deeply struggling, like especially in these community disaster preparedness pieces, because we're trying to help communities address disasters and be proactive in disasters that really can have the most positive impact on the most vulnerable populations, right? So there's a lot of folks who may not have the same education, and getting them to not feel like they're dumb, and
Mm.
so what words do I use to describe certain things? I can't be using large words or vocabulary that they may not understand. And then in translation, if we're doing it and it's, Spanish translation, like really connecting with people. And that's where the physiology comes in, like seeing people where they are, holding people as able. Um, yeah. And so just being really mindful. So I have to take care of myself. I have to be resilient. I have to drink water. I have to get a good night's sleep. I have to do all the things that are essential so I can be my best, and be of service to the folks that are, actually doing the work. I mean, my job is easy, I think, in a lot of ways. Their job is hard,
Yeah.
you know.
And what I hear is also to have the trust in the group and to communicate even non-verbally so that they can find the trust in themselves or the confidence they can do it.
Yeah. I mean,
As you mentioned.
get them to own it, get
Mm.
them to own and again, in the collaboration space, like in the round of collaboration, we talk about, these 5 practices, collaborative mindset, like, hey, what are you coming into? What's the mindset? Are you kind of here as a prisoner? I don't say it that way, but some people come in like, what's your mindset? And to me, mindset is a big deal. As we were talking about the stress earlier, this is where part of that cognitive work is that the mindset that I hold stepping into the space will definitely have an impact. So I introduce some concepts around mindset and the science behind mindset. The second is around self accountability, which is what choices, just explore that you have more choice than you currently think you do. Let's just practice that for a bit. Um, Self awareness, and it's something because we do a survey, and self awareness is often the lowest score of all of these practices. So again, the collaborative mindset, the self accountability, which is about choice, self awareness, which is, do I know what causes me to become defensive, and do I have a strategy to get through it? The fourth is around openness, like
Mhm.
really speaking my truth, and
Ooh.
creating the conditions where my truth, it doesn't equal your truth. And that's where innovation again can come from. It's like, man, we're looking at this issue, and my truth with this issue is very different. But what happens if we start to mash up this thinking? What new possibilities can occur? And that's why, again, as a facilitator, really trying to create that space where people can open up and be who they want to be with each other. I mean, that's the magic. And then the last one is just the interest-based problem solving. And
Mm.
again, we can't be negotiating we can't be problem solving if we're not self-aware, right? Because there's always a high likelihood that people are going to get derailed by an emotion or by a trigger or by something. And so getting to say, hey, when you say that, this is what here's what I feel about myself in that situation. Because we're having to make a change, and this change is leading me to think that I will no longer have a job, for example. It's
Hmm.
like, well, let's talk about that. You
Yeah.
know, and those are some of the conversations that I find myself in right now. And it's again, it's very real, very raw, but also extremely beautiful in a lot of ways. And so that's the beautiful part about it, is getting it out there so we can work with it.
Yeah. Working with humans instead of
Yeah,
masks or titles or
yeah. We're not
roles.
Yeah, we're not bags of meat. We're not a bag of meat, man. We
Yeah.
are humans. We are, and it's our, it is so much. And I sometimes even think that it's not even about our psychology, but really, again, it's about our biology, right?
Mm.
It's recognizing that all that chemistry that's going on, because just the thought of something can trigger somebody in a negative space, right? That's where that alchemy comes in, moving someone from an agitated state to a calm and focused state so they can get something done. And that can be done like that if it's done with practice and done with knowledge, that they can use that knowledge for good. Like going to your happy place is like a good strategy to get unmoored from a stressful situation. So there's
Mm.
always, and so I'm visiting the beach a lot during meetings sometimes just to be calm.
Yeah. And you made me curious with the about the choice, realizing that we have more choice than we think.
Mhm.
Um, and I think especially in group processes, we restrict, or everyone restricts themselves just by assumptions,
Mhm.
thinking what is possible, what is not possible, and what the choices they actually have.
Yeah.
Do you have an activity that you do to make them aware of?
Yeah, well, there's so many. I mean, I have because of my experiential education background, I will sometimes just in real time just go off and do live at the improv, right? One of them is an exercise called Don't Touch Me, where I give them a bunch of rules, right? They have to figure something out, but I just give them a bunch of rules and get them to understand. What ends up happening is that they have to, well, so they have to, I'll go through the instructions. So, because all I can say is like, so I have them stand in a circle. I put an object in the center of the circle, and I say, you pick a partner across. So, let's say you're across the circle from me, and then I say, point at somebody across the circle. So you point at me, I point at you, and so just make sure you have a partner. Give that person a high five. And so there might be 8, 10. Sometimes I've done it with like up to 24 people, and so I might put a little round dish in the center, and I'll just say, you must change places with your partner. You must say, don't touch me while you're moving. You must touch the plate in the center and not touch anyone else in the process. For if you do, a second is added to the overall time. This is a timed event, and your goal is to do it as fast as possible as a team. Right? And there's just awkward, like, And then some people just jump into it, right? Um, and they touch, or it's a little bit chaotic, and so that becomes a part of like, how often do you just jump into something without taking a step back? So these are all kinds of these opportunities to learn. And then as they go through the different iterations and practice, I'll just say, can I just share an observation? I always ask for permission. Sure. Sometimes people are like, no, we'll do it. And I'm like, okay. But typically they'll I'm able to share an observation. I'll say, how many of you would say that you're planning around a set of rules versus a result or an outcome, right? And I think that's the part, is those frames, those biases, whatever rules that we're living by, start to limit our ability to think of possibilities. And so, what do you currently view as an impossible time in this exercise? People say, 5 seconds or 2 seconds. Like, great. How would you structure yourselves if it were going to be in 2 seconds? Well, we would have to start, maybe stand next to each other. Oh yeah, is there any rule that says you couldn't start standing next to your partner? Is there any rule that says you can't hold up the plate before you even begin? Is there any rule? So you start to see the possibilities. But going back to your point, like,
Mm.
people start to play with these biases and these rules to explain. And so when someone says, I am anything, that's a bias, right? I can't because I am. And so what I try to encourage people to say is understand the language that they're using to describe their reality, because that part there is really where the magic happens, is to say, well, what happens if you maybe recognize that you can be that in certain situations, but what needs to happen now? Well, I really need to be innovative. But people say, I'm not very creative. How often do you hear that? It's like, okay, I'm not very creative. What happens if you keep telling yourself that for the remainder of your life? Versus I know there are times where I'm not very creative. So give me some examples where you've been creative. Well, I can be creative in these situations. Great. So you have that capacity. Again, capacity, right? Um, or I'm this personality style, right? To
Mhm.
explain away a bad behavior. It's like, no, you can be a jerk. It's like when you're triggered, right? Or you can be, people say, I'm a red. Like, no, you're an asshole. But it's getting people to recognize and developing that self-awareness of, what are your triggers? What's coming up for you? Who do you want to be? How do you want your team to be around you? But ultimately, what people realize is that they start framing things in terms of an outcome, and it doesn't have to be like a heavy duty result, but just like I want to work with less stress. Okay, great. What would need to happen? How do we structure ourselves to get to that? What would we need to believe? What rules we need to play by to do that? And then getting those out on the table, because again, especially in a hybrid environment, I don't think we're having conversations that are as fruitful as they can be because we're trying to be efficient at the cost of being effective and thoughtful
Yeah.
and mindful.
And I think also, so especially in the hybrid or in the online space, we have to be very explicit.
Hmm.
And what I learned from my therapist is that I have a tendency, and I think I'm not the only one, to be very clear on what I don't want and very mushy what I do want.
Mm, mm,
And I think there is generally a difficulty to state what we want. So I want to be less stressed. Okay, what do you need to be less stressed? But if you're less stressed, what are you? So what do you want to be? And this mindset shift to look at us as what do we need, and then we can create it, because then we have ownership. If it's something that we don't want, it's usually we quickly fall into the victim mode.
right. Well, and again, I think from a motivation standpoint, though, I think it's important to recognize that maybe you're moving away from a motivation. So you don't want those things. So if you don't do those things, what will you get? Well, I'll get this stuff. Oh, so you kind of have an idea, right? So
Mm.
I think the framing of it is, and that's why I think, at least for me, really listening where you have motivations, you are moving towards in some situations and you're moving away in others, right? And so you have the capacity to do both. It's just a matter of framing it in a way that's going to be of service to you. So when my son was young, he was a very moving towards kid. He was very goal oriented. And so as a dad, I'd just say, well, if you got these things done, you clean up your room, you can get those things accomplished. Really? Boom, did it. My daughter was very moving away. And so, if you did these things, those things won't happen, right? So there are ways to kind of, if I'm in tune with an individual and where they are and where they want to go, or what their station is and their orientation is towards whatever, then again, I can just ask some clarifying questions that will maybe help them get where they ultimately want to go. But I don't want to like disparage if you are moving away from person, because we spend a lot of energy avoiding the things that we don't want, and that's normal, right?
It
But if
doesn't get
those
us
things,
anywhere.
yeah, well, it can. I mean, you can definitely. It's just really exhausting. I find that we spend a lot more energy avoiding things and moving towards things, right?
Yeah.
Um, but that's where the momentum comes in. Get people excited about this future, and I think that's again what I'm experiencing out there is a lot of people don't have a sense of a future because of climate change and all these towns that are in front
Mm.
of us. But yet we're going to have to adapt and adjust and be resilient. And so again, bringing us back to that previous conversation, it's like we have to keep the conversation going. Um, and again, as a facilitator, um, I want to keep the conversation going. I want to kind of keep myself feeling like I have a choice, right? I can check out or I can stay engaged.
Yeah.
So now there's so much to this world, and that's why I love, like, whether I'm facilitating a meeting or facilitating a team, just sometimes just living in the questions together and holding space just to live in the question and not
Yeah.
saying a bloody word is also beautiful.
Yes. Yeah, we definitely don't sit with questions enough.
Mm. Yeah, I wrote something, something called "What's in a Question," right? A question could be really inspiring. I don't have I wrote it many years ago, but it can just create new worlds or just limit people.
Yes.
So when people say there are no dumb questions, I'm like, oh my God, there are so many bad questions.
Yes.
You know, like, why can't
Okay.
I, why are you like this versus here's what do you want? What do I want? What do I want that's going to add value to our relationship? What do we need so we can be more whole and complete together? Like, just asking questions because I think our brains are pretty damn uh, effective at coming up with the answers.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and
that's the
depending
beautiful part.
how the question is asked. I
Yeah.
recently came across a post on LinkedIn. I loved it. The distinction between how creative are you
Hmm.
as opposed to how are you creative?
Mm.
Boom.
Hmm. Why was that such a boom for you in your brain?
The how creative are you puts my brain into a scale. So, oh,
Hmm.
there's a minimum creativity and there's a maximum, and then to whom do I compare myself? And suddenly there's all that stress, but I'm not creative. And the how are you creative creates the capacity for me to look into different areas of my life where I
Hmm.
am creative.
Oh yeah.
And
What did you?
suddenly it's a self-inspection, it's a
Yeah.
discovery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And isn't that fun? I mean, especially when you dig back up that thing that was already there, you'd buried with whatever belief you had about it. That's
Yeah.
awesome. I mean, just looking at you light up like a Christmas tree thinking about it. So it's a good question.
Yes. What is the thing that you would have wished you had known before when you just began your facilitation journey?
Hmm. But I think there are two big moments for me. One was kind of the realization of the whole Socrates and the Maieutic method. When I used to do it was probably in my mid 30s. I was doing team building and ropes courses and spending all day, and I felt like I had to fill the space, right? And I would be exhausted at the end of the day because I'd have to drive like 4 hours to go set up the course, do the course, and drive back 4 hours, and it was a long day, so it was typically a 20-hour day, and I'd be falling asleep. And then I had this epiphany. It's like, man, I'm just here to create space and make sure people are safe physically, right? Emotionally, mentally. And that was like the most energizing thing I discovered. Like, man, this is not my baby. I don't need to own it. I just need to make sure they're safe and not step in my own thing by being mindful of how I'm treating people. Like, so just this is their journey. I think that was the biggest thing. Just that whole Maieutic, just the midwife. And I know it sounds crazy coming from a man. It was like I
Not
just
at all.
recognizing. And then the second one, I think in the work doing the work with the radical collaboration that signs of defensiveness and I went through human element, which is the work that Will Schutz had done many years ago, and just getting to the point where I like who I am, I
Mm.
accept who I am, um, and I'm not here to entertain. My role is to just be present and purposeful, and I can hold that space versus my role is to be accepted, like, and I need to have acceptance, or I need to be liked, or I need to be loved. It's like, no, I like who I am. I like the journey that I'm on, and it hasn't been easy. I mean, I still, like I said, I still might struggle. I still have a little road rage now and then, but I really am working on practicing. I think the biggest, and in that journey, my last year, my younger brother passed away, and the power of being purposeful and present is really what I've been working on. So that to me is where the superpower comes in. Is just like, man, I just want to be present and in the moment because it's in these moments that I get to be a part of with other people that become defining for them and get them to feel like what it means to truly live, which, in my brother's transition, um, helping to facilitate that journey was probably the hardest and probably the most fulfilling for me
Thank you.
because that was because I think in that you start, at least for me, question what is it that I'm going to bring? What is going to be my transition, and what is going to be my the rest of my journey on this planet, and again, to be really purposeful, because I think that's our work, and if we can just, again, show up with that humanity, with ourselves and for ourselves, so that we can be that for others. That's what we need right now. And I think that's really, for me, again, a big part of when I'm facilitating is just, I want to be purposeful. And I'm not going to apologize for wanting you to be better, because you're paying me to want to be better. So that's where that, being able to ask those questions that maybe, um, again, ask questions based on what they're saying, but sometimes giving that question, sometimes, like I was with a conversation this morning and this woman just started crying. I just asked her one question, and it was really a potent experience. It was one of those things where it's like, I wasn't I just asked a question, but she, I think, allowed, felt safe, and stepped into the answer and discovered something about herself that she had been working on and wants to continue to work through. So that to me is the greatest responsibility, of making sure that that person feels safe and supported in their journey. How can I support you? So, and that's what I did for my brother, get him to experience the journey, so he's present along the way. So
Thank you for sharing that with us. And I sense the deep care for your work and showing up and being human. And I really appreciate that you also showed this, your human side and the emotions that you spoke about. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm still processing that journey with him, but also I think I just have this greater sense that we have to show up that way with each other. I really do. It's the movement that I want to be a part of creating is a movement where, like you, and people like you, and people in the community that you're with right now are, all, we have to know that we're doing it together, and that we can really transform. So I'm really grateful for the community that you've built and including me in, to be a part of it, and love to stay connected and having you be a part of the community, like including you into our community, and just keep growing, because if we tapped into the potential that exists in all of our communities, I think we could truly transform. And that's what I want to be a part of, co-creating with everybody. So
yeah, thank you. And it's, knowing the facilitators globally and the mindset we bring to the space, and the courage to step in and to be vulnerable and to lead by example and to step in with the emotions and to embrace and hold space for all of that, including ourselves. I think we need more of that to tackle today's problems.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think there's on one hand, I know there's emotions like mine that will come up in groups, and in that I have to, be that hospice, be that guide where I'm in my body and being present. So because if I get worked up, that becomes a challenge. But when I think about what I'm here to do, it's such a deep honor, and I think that's the part that I get emotional about, because I really, from being getting in that fight my freshman year, and the journey that I've been on since then, I mean, that is, I reflect on that. I'm just so overwhelmed with just how lucky I've been, so that's the part that has just been, and the journey's not over, and that's what I'm excited for. But also, for all the folks on this that might be listening to this, man, I invite, to participate with me, or work with, collaborate with, so that we can make this world just again, a better place, because we need it. And I believe that there's a very silent majority out there that we need to tap into, and there's a vocal minority that seems to be running everything, and I'm just tired of it. So
Yeah. And we do have the skills.
we have the
And
gifts. for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is a good cleansing for me. I needed this. So it's good to just let it out. And I appreciate you for the community you built and the work that you're doing. And just I hope you have a wonderful vacation. And just like I said before the call, just how grateful you feel you fit me in, because our schedules were a little crazy. But I really appreciate everything you've done. I've learned so much from just reading your writings and listening to your old podcast, some of your older podcasts, and some of the people you brought in. It's just been, like, I think I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. So it's pretty awesome. So
thank you. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. And I'm looking forward to re-listening.
Thank you. And again, just keep up the great work. Enjoy the holiday. I can't wait to see you come back with your batteries fully charged. Because if this is you're ready for vacation, I can only imagine what you'd be like after the vacation. It's gonna be awesome.
Yeah, although when I get into the
Yeah.
flow of a great conversation, then it's the batteries are all up again.
Oh, it's awesome.
Right?
Well,
That's the beauty of it.
Yeah,
Thanks for
thank you
sharing
again.
your energy with me and to show up fully.
Yeah,
Appreciate
wake up, grow up, show up, baby. That's it. That's
Yes.
see ya.
Thank you.